Hello everyone and welcome to a rather shiny-faced episode of Backtracking. We're gonna go on with the actual albums of Flyleaf, and we'll start with their debut album, Flyleaf. Released in 2005, it came out through Octo and it was produced by Howard Benson. The album was re-released in 2008 in the UK under Polydor Records as well. Hashtag the more you know. I can't believe I actually said hashtag there. Ugh. Anyway, this album does interestingly contain my first Flyleaf song in the first track on the album titled I'm So Sick. Well, sort of. I heard the intro of the song on Die Hard 4, and I wasn't really on the cusp of listening to that style of music back then. Obviously, it has grown on me in the 13 years since, but still. But enough about how old I am. I'm gonna be 28 in 2 months, Jesus. Let's actually talk about the album before I get more existential. I'm gonna say this right now, and it's no surprise to anyone who knows about Had Benson, but he does absolute magic here. Remember, this album came out a decade and a half ago now, and it sounds like it came out just earlier this year, and we're only in February. The dude's ahead of his time, but obviously it isn't just him, as the band are really good here as well. They capture this really good rock balance with this alternative metal take that has some Christian influences, obviously, but the band do their best to make it actually stand out amongst the crowd, especially at the time. It is a bit strange that the album didn't start getting more traction until 2008, and I'll attribute that to the band's hard work and their unique sound. The album captures that sound I mentioned earlier with the song I mentioned earlier, and I'm So Sick, and shows lead vocalist Lacey Sturm as a charismatic singer, and her clean singing is great, as well as her screaming. The songwriting is actually pretty strong too, as it deals with the darker sides of life as a Christian, which is a favourite topic of mine among bands that lean that way. And the album also covers things like death and depression, and one of the songs, and my favourite song of the album, titled Cassie, is about Cassie Bernal, a student who died in the Columbine High School massacre. So yeah, Flyleaf aren't afraid to get heavy on you asses. I did notice that this album did get more of a mixed response from people, but I'm definitely on the positive side of that. I think this is a really strong debut, and it's definitely worth a few spins. It's melodic, it's produced well, and it has really good writing. This absolutely ticks all my boxes, so yeah, this is just, something I like. It's good stuff. We then move on to the band's second album, Memento Mori. Released in 2009, it would come out through A&M and Octone, and Howard Benson would return to produce like a pro. I feel bad for that phrasing, as this album is actually proper rate good, but I'll get to that later. So you may have noticed the 4-year gap since their debut, and in the band's defense, they did start writing new material barely after their debut was released. But because of how successful it was, they were pretty busy touring and promoting it, not to mention their songs getting used in movies and video games and so on and so forth. More exposure usually equals more touring and less time to write new material, and the band were even writing more touring too. But they did eventually manage to get their breathing room, and soon Memento Mori was released. I will admit, it feels a bit odd to me that the band's second album has this title, as it usually points towards a sense of finality, and it also makes less sense to me, as this wouldn't even be the band's last album with Lacey Sturm. But there you go. However, goodness did the hard work pay off for this one. Not only did this further boost the band's success, but Flyleaf became the first female-led act to top the Billboard hard rock charts thanks to this album. And if you want further proof, just listen to the album's content. It starts with the sneaky-deaky hidden pre-gap track titled Uncle Bobby, but doesn't actually kick off until the following track, Beautiful Bride, and it shows a heavier side of the band right off the bat, so to speak. I'm glad that all the attention they got didn't really weigh down on them, as they still get dark here, talking about things such as suicide, abuse, belief, and false love. And all in all, I think my favourite song, and the song that wraps up all those subjects the most, is The Kind. It might sound like a good title, but it's actually a very dark song. Anyway, the fact that the band took their time really shows itself on this album. In my opinion, this is a really good follow-up to what I believe to be an underrated debut, and I feel like this one absolutely deserves its praise. We then move on to the band's third album, New Horizons. Released in 2012 through the same label and produced by the same dude, this is also the last album to feature Lacey Sturm as the lead vocalist. Aww. In hindsight to that joke that I made when talking about Memento Mori, New Horizons is a pretty apt name for this album. For one thing, as I mentioned, it would be Lacey's last with the band, but another factor is that Lacey announced his departure from the band not long before the album actually came out. Possibly another thing that ties into this album's title is the more DIY feeling of it, as the band built their own recording studio in 2011 to record the album. Also, Lacey leaving does sort of add to the title of Memento Mori for two reasons, as in the time between that and New Horizons, two major things would happen. One thing, Lacey would give birth to her son Jack, and for the other thing, one of the band's audio engineers named Rich Caldwell would pass away in the time between. Although, come to think of it, that could be one of the inspirations for the lyrics on this album, as well as the overall tone. Their previous albums were dark and heavy, but this one takes it up a notch with a much more somber note to it. Somber notes. The messages seem to cover those personal things, as well as covering topics like questioning faith. Another indicator of the tone is the music and structuring. It feels more paced and measured out, and uniquely, Lacey almost doesn't scream at all through this album, which allows the listener to focus on her cleaner vocals to easier understand her pain and her heartbreak. In some ways, stuff like that is heavier than, just screaming all the time. You don't need booming riffs and incoherent yelping to get a point across. For those reasons, I appreciate Flyleaf's more measured approach here. My favourite song on the album would have to be Freedom. Lacey and the whole band give it their all on the former singer's last album with them, and Howard Benson continues to bring out the best in them. Well, while he's still around for this one at least, because this would be his last album with them too. Still, good enough from both to go out on. And finally, we reach the band's fourth album, Between the Stars. Released in 2014, there'd be multiple changes to this one, as it would be released via Loud and Proud and Red Records, there'd be a new producer in Doug Gilmore, and there's also the tiny fact that this is the band's first and only album with their new lead vocalist, Kristen May. Uniquely, this is also the band's only album with a guest appearance, as Beck Holcraft appears on the song Platonic. So, like with pretty much any band that go through a singer change, there is often some worry that the new one won't be able to pick up the slack of the old one. It's one of rock music's greatest stigmas, and it did sadly come for Flyleaf, but not in the way you'd expect. Yes, Kristen would leave the band in 2016, mostly due to not feeling like she belonged with them, but hell, I thought she did a good job on this album. I really appreciate that they weren't trying to sound like a new Flyleaf with a new singer, and I really, really appreciate that Kristen didn't just phone it in and try to do a Lacey Sturm impression. In fact, Flyleaf themselves didn't have an easy time before this album, and not just because of getting a new singer, but also because of Kristen's old band Vedera breaking up. And oddly enough, the main reason that Kristen would leave would be due to giving birth to a son. Much like Lacey's reason for leaving Flyleaf. Weird that. Anyway, the album starts with Set Me On Fire, and it shows that this is sort of the same Flyleaf, just with a new voice. And, it's again more restrained like New Horizons was, but it still has its heavier moments, and the lyrics cover more positive subjects like love, hope, and strength, and keep in mind it wasn't an easy journey to get here. The production does complement that well, though, further adding to the newer things Troy, but still holding up the band's strengths. My favourite song has to go to Thread, and all in all, Between the Stars is a pretty good note for the band to go out on, but I do hope that there's a future for them soon and that we get them back. But still, this is a good way to round off their career so far, and I don't know exactly if people are bashing on Kristen May because she was the new lead singer. But honestly, I personally feel like she did a great job, but that's just my opinion. Is she better than Lacey? I don't know, but did she fill the gap? Absolutely. I feel like that's all she needed to do, and she did that and then some. Anyway, that will about do it for this episode. The next Backtracking episode will be my first two-part episode, as I will be covering Arch Enemy episode. Sorry, I'm saying episode a lot, it's out in my head. But the things before that will happen are new PPW stream tonight, possibly a new Fire the Night this weekend. I believe there's a card. I could be wrong. I don't know. And then Backtracking and the usual shit after that. And as always, thank you for watching. You're awesome. Bye-bye.